Let's speak now to the Conservative MP, Sir John Redwood, who's with us. Good afternoon to you, John. I mean, is it working? Let's just put the first question like that.
Well, the Prime Minister is right that now inflation is coming down quite quickly, and that was an extremely necessary part of what he's trying to achieve. He now has to demonstrate growth. I think we have probably seen the worst of a small, shallow recession, which we had in common with many others in Europe. And so I wish him well. I think this new measure in the budget does give a little bit of the money back that the higher taxes have been taking from people. And the sooner we can do more of that, the better. This has to be one of a series of budgets or fiscal events to get the levels of taxation back down again.
But if people are worse off when they walk into the ballot box, you know, it's the old kind of pound in your pocket litmus test, if you like, then that's it, isn't it? Game over, really. People need to tangibly feel, experience a sense that things are going in the right direction. If you don't have that feeling, then it's toast for the Conservatives, right?
Well, for any individual, whether you're worse off or better off depends on a whole variety of things. Have you benefited from the quite big increases in benefits going on? Have you benefited from the rise in interest rates if you've got some savings? Have you had a pay rise, which is more than inflation? Some will have lost, some will have not have lost. But no, I don't think people judge it entirely on the past. I think what they ask themselves in an election is, given that you've got a series of options in the ballot box between very fallible parties, which one is going to do you most good or least harm? And so they will be mainly looking forwards. Who do they think is most likely to get those taxes down, to boost their real incomes? Because you're right that we've had a bad string of years ever since Labour greatly damaged the economy in 2008-9, with the big recession then that, of course, took incomes down.
If somebody had said to you back then, though, John, that the tax burden under the Conservatives, more than a decade on, would be the highest for 70 years, you'd have thought they were bonkers. But the irredeemable reality is that that's exactly where we are now. How does that feel as a Conservative?
Well, I would have told them I thought it was very unlikely, and I'd also told them something that would have been true, which is that I would have carried on arguing that we should not do that. But obviously, the tax strategy has got knocked off course in a big way by the decision to lock down the economy very generally and the impact COVID and then the inflation had upon everybody. And I think the government was right to respond to the bad conditions of lockdown and the inflation which the Bank of England triggered with its very dangerous monetary policy by giving people quite a lot of support. And that support took the form of subsidies which had to be paid for out of taxes. You've
been through many elections, John. You know what it's like. Pounding the streets, delivering leaflets, standing in the middle of the town centre, etc. Will this one feel different to you? I mean, obviously, any politician, at least on the outside, wants to appear optimistic. But as we sit here now, you know your party are going to lose. What's the message you'll have for your constituents, and why would they vote Conservative?
Well, I don't know that, and I will follow the same approach in this election that I've followed in all the previous ones, which is I'm a participant, I'm in it to win, I'm fighting to win, I want to win. The electorate will decide who wins, and I'm not the person to ask to comment on who is likely to win. The current opinion polls are bad for the Conservatives, but the current opinion polls also show that the many millions of people who are currently very critical of the Conservatives and expect more and better of the Conservatives are not persuaded that a Starmer-led Labour government is what they want. Indeed, many of the people who criticise the Conservatives for various things we've done or failed to do know that those things would be even worse if they opted for Labour.
Do you think the Tories can win?
Well, of course, we can win. Labour can win. As I said, I'm not a commentator. I'm not going to tell you.
You are a member of Parliament, though, John. I mean,
because
you must have a view on whether you think your party can win.
The thing to ask me about is the economic policy. I thought that's why you invited me on.
No, indeed, but naturally some things are clearly interlinked nicely.
To get changes in it. No, I'm not going to comment on who will win the election. You ask people who study polling to tell you about that.
OK. I thought maybe asking a member of Parliament might be, a fairly relevant area of your expertise.
Well, no,
if
obviously,
nothing else.
Everyone has to say their party's going to win. Otherwise,
You don't have to. You could say they're going to lose if you want, John. I mean, that's fine with us. I mean, that would be a very honest
I am not
analysis
giving you a
if
view
that's
on
how
what
you
is
feel.
the outcome of the election,
Okay.
because that is for the electors
All right,
to decide.
well,
You're now
just
being
on the
very
point.
silly. You're
Okay.
wasting a good interview.
On the point though of the fiscal statement yesterday, the budget, is that budget enough for the Tories to win the election? There you go. Dovetailed beautifully.
It's not enough on its own. It is helpful because it's the second budget or fiscal event, as they now call it, that shows that Conservatives are back wishing to cut taxes and starting to cut taxes. But as you and many others pointed out, a lot of people are paying a lot of extra tax because of the COVID measures and because of the way the government had to respond to that. You couldn't just dish out hundreds of billions of pounds of relief to individuals and businesses without raising some tax to pay for it. That we trust as a one-off, and as the economy grows, so then you can relieve the burden of taxation, unless you have runaway public spending. I mean, the really big and important argument, which this budget opened up, one which I've been encouraging the government to open up and to change its policies on, is this big issue of getting better value out of all the massive increases in public spending we witnessed over the last 3 or 4 years. And we've had an unprecedented collapse in public service productivity since 2019. And we need to get that lost productivity back. And I hear so many bad interviews on this where they think it's about applying new technology and spending to save. Whereas the immediate task is to get back to the levels of productivity we had using 2019 productivity and investment, which is already in the public services. And what we've seen over the COVID period is a massive over-recruitment to civil servants and public administrators, a huge escalation in the number of managers, and the results, instead of it being better managed, are being worse managed. And the government is now rightly saying, let's address that so that going forward, we can have better public services with less costs. The actual hit was about £30 billion of extra costs for trying to deliver the same thing.
Yeah, no, I get that. It's two words that seem to be haunting the Chancellor and the Prime Minister at the moment. Fiscal drag. In fact, the BBC revealed today that Mr Hunt's nickname is the Fiscal Drag Queen. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, well,
Are people chanting that on the green benches, John?
It's not a nickname we've ever used about the Chancellor, nor will we. I think it's a very inappropriate phrase, surprising phrase for the BBC to use. I think they get quite a lot of complaints about that.
Have you got a nickname for the Chancellor?
No, I call him either the Chancellor or Jeremy if I'm in a private meeting with him. Those two things seem to work perfectly well. But again, why are we discussing his name?
Listen, I totally agree with you. I thought the BBC's drag queen thing was preposterous. It didn't, even comedically, it didn't make any sense. But I hear you. Listen, John Redwood, always good to.
It's a very dangerous thing to say, and I would imagine some people would be offended.
Yes,
so.
a point I've also made as well this afternoon. John, thank you for your time. John Redwood, with us here on Talk TV.